Welcome to Season 2 of Making Our Way. After Season 1, we got the band back together to talk about how we spent our summer vacations, and then realized this episode would post on 9/11. That led to a discussion about our memories of that day and its impact on our lives. How we spent our summer vacations will be the subject of a future episode, but today, in commemoration of 9/11, we present this brief episode we've titled The Second Plane. First, some introductions are in order. Making Our Way is 4 of us, plus we welcome special guests from time to time. Jan and Rob McMahon make their home in Safety Harbor. Jan is my sister. Rob is my best friend for over 60 years. I am Jim Chain, and Deanna and I will celebrate 26 years of marriage this year, or as Dee calls it, a decade of married bliss. We live just north of Tampa. In the fall of 2023, Jan, Rob, and I were enjoying retirement, meeting for coffee each Thursday at Cafe Vino Tinto in Safety Harbor, where we talked about how we each had made our way to that point in our lives, the many places we had visited, and how our views had changed over the years about religion, politics, food, culture, coffee, and community. Then someone said, "Hey kids, let's put on a podcast." And here we are.
Hi, I'm Jan. I'm Deanna.
That's very good. And we are making our way. The extra sounds you might hear include Sky, a black lab female, who is, how old is Sky now?
She's 6. She's going to be 7 in December.
A beautiful animal. Sky keeps Jan and Rob as her pets. Mm-hmm. And then we have, living with us, we have Brigus, our 8.5-year-old golden retriever male. And we also, just last December, brought in a teacup Yorkie named Pip. And he's, they all join us here in the studio for this. So occasionally you'll hear this or that from them. And that's just fine because we love our animal friends. It occurs to me that this first episode of Season 2 is going to drop on September 11th. If I were to give the phrase, a day that will live in infamy, we all know what that means, right? The lone gunman, we know what that means. And for me, a new phrase is the second plane. Dee told me a plane had hit the World Trade Center. And then suddenly there was a second plane and the world changes. Where were you, Ron?
I turned on the Today Show because I heard a plane had hit one of the towers. We were watching it as the second plane came in, and it's like, oh my gosh, this is not just an accident.
And were you already at DHQ?
Yeah, I was in Fred Hipp's office because he had a television back in the day when you needed a television to see those things. Because we didn't understand. I mean, you watch something and you assume it's an accident. I mean, I assumed it was an accident. And then we saw the second plane hit, and I still had no real understanding of what all that meant.
Well, also at DHQ, the Musgraves were there. Mm-hmm. And I remember their son, Vince, was a flight attendant, and they could not get in touch with him to know what was going on because no one knew how big this thing was going to be. It was just there are planes being used as weapons. And they found out later he was fine. His plane had been grounded. And this is where Gander comes into it, Dee.
Yep.
And the musical Come From Away, because all of the planes coming transatlantic to North America, the Gander airport had a runway and facilities big enough to handle that. It had been a U.S. air base. And so a lot of planes came in there. I have one interesting story of that day. We all know Tom Jones, the real Tom Jones, Major Tom Jones. He's recently passed away. He was set that day to fly out of Washington to Los Angeles. And he was flying out of Dulles. And he had a ticket, and someone had bought the ticket for him through the Salvation Army. He was a Salvation Army major, an officer. So they buy him this ticket to L.A., and so he looks at it and he says, that's way too much to spend for a flight. Find me a cheaper flight. So they found him a cheaper flight. He had been booked on Flight 77. This was the plane that went into the Pentagon. But because of his frugal nature, he had been switched to another plane. But that's just Tom, doing the most good. So we just take that moment to remember 9/11 and what a change in life, everything that has changed since then.
One of my strongest memories of that time, at first there was silence because nobody flew for a while. But my strongest memory really of people was how polite everybody was on the road. And there was this heightened awareness, consideration of other people.
Yeah.
Right now, that seems like a long time ago.
Doesn't it?
We're not in that world anymore.
Yeah.
But it was, in a way, this great moment of recognizing the humanity in each other and how our whole understanding as a country changed with that day.
Yeah, just like something as mundane or routine as buying groceries. And there, as you're at the checkout, you could just say, how you doing?
Yeah.
To a total stranger.
Yeah.
And you weren't strangers because you're connected through this.
I'm going to mention a book, if it's okay. One of the things that came out of 9/11 was both a misunderstanding, distortion, assumptions about Islam. It became not a good time to be Muslim in America. And so I wanted to understand a little bit more about the dynamics, and I found a book called The Faith Club. And it's a book about the three women who get together to talk about faith. One is Muslim, one is Christian, and one is Jewish. And all they do is have conversation to build understanding between human beings, put a face on it and have an understanding about where different people are coming from. So I would really recommend that book. And I did at the time to people who had no real experience with dealing with anybody who was Muslim. The other thing that came out of that was in the church that we attend now, we developed a relationship with an Islamic community. The goal was to build understanding between two different faiths so that both they could understand us and we could understand them. It was a very powerful experience. People in the local mosque came to our adult education, and we could ask them anything, and they would answer our questions, and they could ask us questions too. And the attempt was to build a bridge. That came out of our kids in our church who wanted to do something to build that understanding because they recognized some of the hate and fear that was being directed at the Muslim community. Again, very powerful, an important part, I guess, of my understanding of what it meant to be Muslim in America.
Making a connection between that and what's going on now with Palestinians and Jewish people, and I see it in my school. I have some Jewish students, and last year we had a problem with people writing hate things on bathroom stalls toward Jewish people. And one of my Jewish kids got a photo of one of these, and she said, "Mrs. Chain, look what someone wrote on the bathroom wall." And I just couldn't believe it. And I'm like, how is it we're here, after all this time and everything that's going on? And it's like history keeps repeating itself. No matter what we do, no matter the history we teach, there's something in our DNA that keeps coming back to the same thing.
When you're talking about the way that Islam is viewed after 9/11,
Right.
I am a follower of what are called the new atheists. I do this as a steel man argument. If not a straw man, where you kind of weaken someone else's or parody someone else's opinion so that you can easily attack it and just ridicule it. The steel man is where you find the best argument you can find, the strongest argument, the steel argument against your position, and see how you do with that. And I thought that this new atheist interest was worth looking into, reading the authors, seeing what they're saying about my faith or faiths in general. But that all got a lot of play in the post 9/11 world. And if you read some of the authors like Christopher Hitchens or Sam Harris or Ayaan Hirsi Ali, they will cite specifically the 9/11 event. And their response to that was to investigate religious fundamentalism. And one day I do want to take a look at the life and career of Ayaan Hirsi Ali, because she was viewed as part of the new atheist movement coming out of Islam. She's good friends with Richard Dawkins, Daniel Dennett, these folks. And she's recently authored a piece entitled "Why I Am Now a Christian," playing right off of Bertrand Russell's famous essay, "Why I Am Not a Christian." So she said, "Why I Am Now a Christian." And she had a discussion in New York early May with Richard Dawkins that I was very interested in. I wanted to hear what she had to say. There's not time right now to explore the whole thing, but I was very interested in the way she was positioning herself from what she had said before. And is it a walk back? Is it a further development? Is it a retraction? Which way is she going with it? But at 9/11, one of the things that it did, it brought in a different discussion about fundamentalism, citing Islamic fundamentalism as the cause of 9/11. So it caused us all to take a look at it.
I want to mention one thing about, I follow a theologian professor his name is Tripp Fuller, and he's a broadcaster, and younger than me, obviously he's a next generation. But so he talked about how he was impacted by 9/11. I was interested in the fact that what he was most disappointed in was the response of Christianity to 9/11 toward people who were Muslim. And it caused, I would say, a faith crisis for him. He had to reevaluate some of how he thought about Christianity, because it became a very hate-filled time. He rejected that as a basis for Christianity, and it caused, again, a reevaluation of his own faith and sent him probably in some different directions because of it, expecting us to treat people a certain way, and that's not what happened.
Yeah. Christian fundamentalism is what Jim's talking about. They talk about religious fundamentalism. We don't talk much about Christian fundamentalism, although in this day and age, I mean, they're, you call them white Christian nationalists. What are they? Well, they're fundamental Christians, basically. They're fundamentalists, and they're dangerous. And I think fundamentalism in it, just on the surface, no matter what faith you're talking about, is dangerous, because it assumes that I'm right, you're wrong.
And that's where the nationalism gets heightened.
That's right.
And we end up with really bad things happening.
Yeah.
Insurrections.
Yes.
Good people on both sides.
I was just going to say.
Yeah.
I don't know if Tripp Fuller mentioned Jerry Falwell or Pat Robertson when he's talking about the reaction of the evangelical reaction to 9/11, but I do know that they, especially Jerry Falwell, is very famous for having gone on and said 9/11 happened because of liberal agendas and homosexuality.
Yeah.
It's because of this that happened. And this is a student of the Bible who would say that. Now, I was talking to your mom the other day. She had a question about some things, and there's this wonderful passage in Luke chapter 13, because what are the things that happen to us that we don't like? They're either natural or they're people instigated, right? So there it is in chapter 13, and Jesus is asked about some Galileans who were slaughtered during their sacrifices. Did you hear about this? So they're sharing the news. It's social media in Jesus' day. Mm-hmm. Hey, did you hear about these Galileans whose blood was mixed in their sacrifices? And Jesus uses the occasion to say, well, do you think that they suffered that way because they were worse sinners than anybody else? He says, no. But we should all take an instant like that to reflect on ourselves, to say, wait a minute, my life is precious. I should make sure I'm on the right road because it could end at any moment. I'm paraphrasing.
I recognize.
That's not the King James. That's just the James version.
James.
And so that's a human-caused disaster. Then he goes to a natural disaster, the other kind and he said, or that tower of Siloam that fell and killed those 18 people. Do you think they died from that tower falling? Could they not have heard this when they're talking 9/11? When that tower fell on them and killed them, do you think they were killed because they're worse sinners than anybody else? And he says, no, but get your life right, repent, make your life correct, learn from that moment. And so Jesus kind of dismisses this whole idea that, if something bad happened to you, we can now accuse you of being somehow a sinner, and that's why it happened to you, which is basically the book of Job all over again. It's not, bad things happen to people because bad things happen. That's why it happens. Some people cause them. Sometimes nature causes it, acts of God, as it were. But that's why could they not have figured out that 9/11 was not a time to score religious political points and say, okay, now we get to take it to the liberal agenda and blame them for this. That it just is, this is what happens. And there are better ways of dealing with that. And yet they would maintain their status as a respected religious person because they're called reverend. Falwell's comments in particular were spark to push against religious fundamentalism from the New Atheist group, and I think they were correct in that pushback there. There are other problems with their arguments, but they did say a number of things that were spot on.
It's bad theology, it's bad thinking, and we need to, as responsible people, learn to recognize those things. We need to have a good understanding of our own theology and also always question our assumptions and our thinking.
Just to tag on to the 9/11 thing, Dee, that hit you and me in a certain way too, because we had been in New York just a couple weeks before. You had not been to New York before, and we were up in Jackson's Point for their camp. We were guests at the camp there and said, well, let's go through New York because New York had a job offer for me, and this was the job that Kevin Norbury had. He was the editor for the music publications for the Eastern Territory. He also played horn in the New York staff band, and he was a piano player. So when he was retiring and leaving that position, they were looking for someone to fill that. So they came to me with it. So we're going to go by New York, go to West Nyack, check out the office, the facilities, and get to know the people and see where we might want to live. So we went down to Manhattan. You wanted to see the Statue of Liberty. We passed right by the World Trade Center, the Millennial Hilton Hotel, and all of that. And then it was just a couple of weeks after that 9/11 happened. And we saw the ruins of what we had just seen before. And at that point, it was one of these things of, do we really want to make this move? There's nothing about fear about New York, but it's one of those events that makes you kind of close in and kind of nest and keep things precious close by. And at that time, I didn't want to be leaving Jan and Rob here in Florida. I wanted to stay close to them. And so I turned down that job. Kevin Norbury himself was nice enough to come out to Jackson's Point and talk over the job and say, this is what you're going to expect there. This is what they'll expect of you and that. And it was okay. Already my hands were starting to go and I couldn't play the way that I wanted to. And so it was, I had a little bit of question about how much piano playing was going to be involved in that. But he let me know about the thing. It was very nice to meet with him. His wife is from Newfoundland. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Sure.
And so it was nice to talk with him, that he made that effort to come out to see us and that we were able to see it. But at that point, we just said, we want to stay here. So that's when we decided to build the house, which could accommodate a dog. That was Cassie. And we've been here ever since. And this seems to be the place where I belong. This is where it is. And so that was a big change. And of course, my making way through life is pretty much like a pinball machine. It just bounces here and there with all these flippers and all these hazards along the way. And then I end up going down the chute anyway. But that was one of the things that 9/11 meant for us. It was a big change. As we wrap up today, I want to make a mention about our transcripts. I understand that Apple Podcast generates a transcript for all of their podcasts, but it's hit and miss with some of the obscure terms, but at least it's there. Also, we run this podcast. It's hosted through Buzzsprouts. That's the company. That's buzzsprouts.com. And then they, once I submit everything to them, they're the ones that issue it out by code that I provide them to all of the other services. That's how our podcast works. And Buzzsprouts allows me to upload one of our own transcripts, which is what I do. So I take a transcript of the session that we've got, but it's text only. And we've also been providing those transcripts at our website, chainmusic.com/podcast. And then we also put on that website, we put our recipes from the times we had recipes in our old shows, and any photos that we needed, we put those on there. But you had to navigate through our website for different things. So I'm going to do it a little bit different for this season. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a PDF of our transcript, and that our transcript from our website will also have any recipes already embedded in it and any photos already embedded in it. So if you want to have like an official transcript that really is the record of what we wanted to present, you'll go to chainmusic.com/podcast and look for the transcript there. And that will happen each week. And also, we're kind of revamping our website so that all the old transcripts are going to be taken off, which includes all the old recipes and all the old photos. And I've put them into one document that is season 1, and it's a transcript for the whole thing. It's a bit of a download. It's something like 50 megs. But if you want to find old shows with all of the photos, all of the recipes, all the extra stuff, the links that we have for all of the references we've made to other sites are all there in that document. So go to chainmusic.com/podcast, look for the transcript for season 1, and then you'll also find our weekly updates for season 2. And with that, thank you for joining us again for this inaugural season 2 podcast. And next week when we come back, I think we're going to school. Until then.